Judge accuses black man of theft and burns a sports car. 5 days later, a notice arrived. If you're new to this channel, I invite you to click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any amazing news stories here. Logan was no ordinary person. His career was full of effort and victory. He was born in a simple neighborhood. From an early age, he learned how important it is to work hard. Today, at the age of 38, he owns 5 technology companies in 3 different countries. Each of them showed a part of the market in important areas. They ranged from creating programs to ways of using artificial intelligence. He was proud of every step he took, but he felt that New York was more than just a new place to work. It was a chance to meet important people, support new ideas, and leave an even bigger impression on the business world. The neighborhood you chose was famous for being very exclusive. Almost all the people who lived there were white millionaires. Everything there was very beautiful and big. Logan had bought a large house that was second to none. The house was big. It had manicured gardens. It also had a swimming pool that sparkled in the sun. The garage was full of fast cars. Among them was his Lamborghini Huracan, a special car that shone like a prize for his victories. Even with the negative reception from some neighbors, he remained steadfast. He knew he wasn't accepted by everyone, but he was determined to prove that he had a right to be there. Henry was a famous and admired judge. He thought people respected him. His life was like a straight line. Everything seemed to fall into place. It was under control and just the way he wanted it, until a new neighbor showed up, causing discomfort he hadn't expected. Logan. Henry didn't know his name, but he knew that this man, this stranger who seemed to stand out in the neighborhood, wasn't like the others. Henry passed Logan's large house every day on his way to court. Whenever this happened, he felt as if something was worrying him even more. At first, it was the cars. They were very expensive cars, like a rich man's collection. Then there was the house. It was modern, large, and had a well-kept garden. It stood out like a jewel in the neighborhood. Envy began to appear slowly, almost like a bad seed. Henry, who had always prided himself on being fair and serious, now couldn't look at Logan without feeling suspicious. He tried to understand and find a reason. He wanted to find out how a man like Logan could have it all. He just couldn't understand it. In Henry's mind, it couldn't be true. He began to think of an idea. Logan had to have done something wrong to be in that situation. There had to be an explanation to help him understand how a black businessman could get out of his situation. From that moment on, Henry looked at Logan much more closely. He walked a little more slowly around the big house, taking a good look at everything. He hoped to see something that would show a mistake, a clue that would confirm what he thought. Henry was a careful man. He used to understand what was between the lines. However, nothing in Logan's life showed that there was anything wrong. Logan was greatly admired by everyone who knew him. His story was a good example. He succeeded because he worked hard and used his intelligence to build his empire. But Henry couldn't deal with this situation. He wanted to find something wrong, something to explain the discomfort he felt. And the more he saw, the more his envy grew. It turned into a very strong hatred. Inside, Henry no longer saw Logan as just a businessman who made a lot of money. He saw Logan as a personal challenge. This made Henry question how he saw the world. The idea that a black man could have more than him was too much to bear. It was like a wound he didn't know how to treat. As Henry drove to work, his face serious and his heart pounding with anger, he decided that he needed to find out more. It was important to understand what Logan was hiding. I needed to find a reason that would make him feel better. I wanted to take away that feeling of feeling smaller, which he would never say he felt. Deep down, Henry understood that Logan wasn't the problem. However, he couldn't deal with his own jealousy and prejudices. So he decided to do everything he could to show that Logan didn't deserve that space. Henry felt very jealous, and every day, he thought more about how to see Logan fail. He thought that would make things go back to normal, as he wanted them to. Henry began to remember, in detail, all the times he had met Logan. Every outfit, every part of the shiny watch on the businessman's arm, the shiny cars he had in his garage. The price of it all seemed too high even for him, who was a judge with many years of work and people's respect. Henry thought that the success of a black man in that situation was a direct challenge to what he, as a judge, stood for. Prejudice, which had previously been hidden in his mind, began to surface with great force. He came to see Logan as a symbol of something wrong and in the way. In the corridors of the courthouse, between trials, Henry thought about justice in the world. For him, Logan was something strange, something different from what he thought was normal. Henry had never wanted to accept this before, but at that moment, seeing Logan's success, he had many thoughts that he would never tell anyone. Every time Henry remembered the businessman walking around town and showing off a luxury he couldn't have, he felt bad. The envy inside him grew as if it were a disease. His mind, which couldn't find logical reasons, began to invent other situations and ask questions with no basis in fact. He can only be doing something that isn't right. He must be mixing with something that's outside the law, Henry thought. His teeth clenched and his fists clenched. He couldn't believe that Logan had gotten there through sheer effort and intelligence alone. It's possible that he uses people. Maybe he's tricked businessmen or people who are in difficult situations. Maybe he's even involved in some plan to hide money. Henry's imagination was very creative, and he immersed himself in it more and more. There was nothing to show that Logan had done anything wrong, but Henry had to think that he had. For him, it was impossible for a black man to get past the obstacles he thought existed. Over time, Henry stopped seeing Logan as just a neighbor. He began to see him as a danger. Every time Logan appeared to Henry, he was dressed in his expensive suits and driving his luxury cars. Henry felt pride and hatred fighting inside him. He was a judge. He stood for law and order. He defended morality. For Henry, a person like Logan shouldn't be in that neighborhood, or in that world. In his confused mind, he saw the businessman as a challenge to the values he thought he stood for. The situation became so complicated that Henry couldn't go a day without thinking about Logan. He thought of ways to show what he thought was a lie. Henry had a conflict with his job. Did you know that, as a judge, his job was to protect justice without taking sides? But every day, he gave himself over more to the prejudice that was destroying him. Logan, for him, was a mistake, something strange. The idea that he could go unpunished seemed too difficult to accept. Henry began to gather information about Logan. He wanted to know every detail that could help prove his ideas. He searched public records. He tried to find any information that could be dangerous. Henry was tired. The thought of Logan walking around the neighborhood at will and showing off a lot of money he didn't think he deserved made the judge very anxious. It was in this moment of agitation that Henry finally decided what to do. The judge, who had spent many years appearing fair and neutral, was now going to do bad things to prove something that he himself had created. He knew that the justice system had some flaws. He understood that the law could often be interpreted and manipulated. He, as a judge, knew these flaws better than anyone else. Henry really wanted to find an excuse to investigate Logan. With a coldness that now seemed to be coupled with anger and envy, he came up with a plan. Did you know that you couldn't act directly? That could make people suspicious of what you really wanted. Henry then decided to call the police. He stood back, controlling the situation without showing himself. He made a quick phone call. He spoke discreetly to a police officer who he knew wouldn't ask about his power. He said that he had received reports about sports cars being stolen and parts being dismantled in the area. These reports, of course, never existed. Henry knew that this accusation made no sense, but he knew that the police were suspicious of anyone who didn't fit in with the standards of that wealthy area. Logan was Henry's ideal target. It only took a small spark to ignite the distrust of the other residents and the people who looked after the rules. On the day of the call, Henry smiled a little when he discovered that the police were already ready to go to Logan's house that evening. He knew that Logan was celebrating an important moment with his partners. For Henry, this was the ideal chance to embarrass the businessman. He wanted to make him nervous and show that, even with a lot of money, he could still be questioned. The night was for partying. Logan was in his big house with partners and friends. They were making a toast to celebrate an important achievement in his career. After many months of talking, he had finally sold one of his technology companies for a large sum of money. The amount he got was something few people could have imagined. The people at the party were laughing. The champagne glasses sparkled in the light of the large house. The music made the place lively. For Logan, that moment was the reward for all the effort he had put in, a night to remember. But the tranquility and happiness didn't last long. While the party was going on, no one noticed that 2 police cars pulled up in front of the mansion. The officers were there on Henry's orders. He was waiting for news from afar. With the order to carry out a thorough search of the property, the officers went to the entrance. They had serious expressions and were ready for action. One of the house's security guards saw them approaching and hesitated for a moment before warning Logan, who still didn't know what was going on. The front door was opened. The officers quickly showed their IDs. They told us why they were there. They were there to investigate a complaint about the theft of sports cars and the dismantling of parts. The news surprised everyone at the party. Everyone looked at Logan. He was surprised and almost couldn't believe what he was hearing. The guests spoke quietly, in disbelief, while the policeman said in a strong voice that they had to search everywhere in the mansion. Logan tried to remain calm, but the surprise was clear on his face. This was his home. It was the place where he felt protected and celebrated his achievements. Then, suddenly, he was treated like a criminal. His friends and associates, trying to understand what was going on, watched as the police began to open doors. They searched rooms and rummaged through furniture and cupboards to find any evidence that might show that the accusation was nonsense. Logan was staring at them. He felt a mixture of anger and despondency inside his chest. The police entry was careful and merciless. The officers were following all the rules. They paid no attention to the party and didn't seem to notice that there were other people around. The party, which had been lively, became quiet. The smiles turned into nervous, uncomfortable looks. The guests, many of whom were businessmen and important people, looked at each other with concern and embarrassment. Logan felt that his good name was being spoiled in front of people who, until that moment, had seen him as a man who couldn't be touched. After a long time, the policeman approached Logan with a face that showed discontent and acceptance. There was nothing in the house that seemed strange. There was no evidence to show that the complaint was true. The search was unsuccessful. The officers, out of options, had to end the operation. Logan took a good look at the officers and asked why they were there. There was a tension in his voice that he tried to hold back, but it gradually showed the anger he felt. The officers said that the complaint had been made by a person in the neighborhood. They said it was a judge called Henry. When he heard the name, Logan became very angry and couldn't control his rage. Judge Henry, the man he knew little about, was responsible for his embarrassment in front of everyone. Now everything seemed clear. Logan now understood that this wasn't just a baseless complaint. It was a personal attack, a clear attempt to destroy his reputation, to make him feel weak and disrespected. Henry, because of his prejudice and envy, changed the situation to make him feel ashamed. He wanted people not to believe him in front of his colleagues. When the policeman left the mansion, the party atmosphere turned sad and uncomfortable. Logan remained quiet for a moment. He tried to control the anger that was strong inside him. His friends and partners, seeing how serious the situation was, tried to comfort Logan. But he was no longer listening. He could only think of one thing: Henry. The shame of that night would never be forgotten by Logan. At that moment, he vowed that it wouldn't go unanswered. He believed that Henry would learn the cost of belittling a man who had not only fought to get where he was, but who also knew how to protect his dignity. The morning after the police raid, Logan was in a very alert but silent state. He lay awake for a long time during the night, remembering every part of the shame Henry had caused him. It wasn't just a forced entry into his home. It was a violation of his dignity, his history, and everything he had achieved with great effort. There was no other reason than the judge's prejudice and envy. Henry, a man who had never spoken to you, decided to see you as a threat. He thought you shouldn't be in that rich neighborhood. To him, you were an example of what he would never accept: a black man who was successful. Logan wanted to resolve it once and for all. He decided to wait for the right moment. He knew that Henry passed every day on the street in front of his house, on his way to the courthouse. So he stood on the balcony, watching carefully what was happening on the street and listening to every car noise that came his way. Finally, he saw Henry's car in the distance. The tension in his face appeared. His posture became rigid. He was prepared to confront that man. He wanted to demand answers and deal with the cause of the prejudice that Henry had shown in such a bold and planned way. When Henry's car got close, Logan waved him to stop. Henry was doubtful for a moment, but when he saw Logan's firm gaze, he stopped the car. He lowered the window and looked at Logan with a face that showed boredom, but seemed to want to show that it was better. For Henry, the man standing in front of him was exactly what he thought he was. He was a businessman who had elevated himself too far. Henry thought that this man needed to be reminded of his position. Henry asked bluntly and unkindly, "What do you want?" Logan walked over to the car. He didn't look away. His voice was firm and calm, but there was a lot of indignation in it. I want to know why you think you can come into my life like that. Weren't you content to come here every day and look at me as if I were a stranger in my own home? Did you need to call the police, Henry? Why did I have to sully my name with a pointless complaint? Henry gave a quick, contemptuous laugh. He leaned back in his car seat as if he were staring at something unimportant. I did what I needed to do, he said, looking at Logan from beginning to end with disdain. A man like you, with your past and your dubious victories. Do you really think I'm going to believe that everything you have is true? Logan clenched his hands into fists. He managed to hold back the urge to get nervous at that moment. He drew in air before speaking. Every word was full of guarded anger. I got everything I have with my own effort. I had to work hard to get here. I didn't do it to be judged by you, who hide in a position to show your prejudices and your envy. Henry leaned closer, with a mean look and a whisper full of malice. Pay attention, Logan. Men like you shouldn't be here. Having money doesn't change the person you are. You're still inferior, and you always will be. I'm a judge. I'm a respected man. I have authority over people like you. The words hit Logan like a powerful punch. Each syllable seemed to carry many years of a prejudice that he already understood, but to hear it so clearly, from someone who didn't even know him, made him very angry. With a moment of anger, he moved closer, his face right up to Henry's. Inferior. I'm much more than you can ever be. If you think you can scare me, you're very wrong. Henry closed his eyes tightly. He felt offended by Logan's response. He couldn't bear the thought of that man standing there, strong and sure, facing him without fear. Henry soon began to make threats that weren't very clear. I'm the rule, Logan. If you think you can get away from me, you're wrong. I can make your life very difficult. I can arrest you at any time, and all your comfort and displays of wealth will soon come to an end. Your destiny is prison. These words were enough to cause something that can't be changed. Logan, filled with rage, couldn't control himself. He took a step back and prepared himself for what was going to happen next. He quickly pulled Henry out of the car. He pushed Henry hard against the side of the vehicle. The fight started right there. Logan unleashed all his anger. Each punch carried the weight of years of fighting prejudice. He had suffered many humiliations. He had to prove every day that he deserved to be where he was. Henry tried to defend himself, but the difference in strength was clear. In a moment of desperation, he managed to break free, falling as far as the entrance to Logan's house. In a moment of anger and desperation, Henry did something surprising and crazy. He took a lighter out of his pocket and lit it. He then approached Logan's car, which was a Lamborghini Huracan standing impressively in the driveway. With an angry look on his face, he threw the lighter onto the car seat. Within seconds, the car began to catch fire. Logan was surprised to see the car on fire. He took a step back for a moment. He hadn't expected Henry to do something so daring. Before he could do anything, Henry was bruised and confused. He managed to get back into his car and sped off down the street. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and his face bore the marks of Logan's punches. He could hardly see well. His vision was blurred. A few kilometers away, he crashed into another car. The pressure of that night was still there when Logan looked at what was left of his car. The fire was burning the vehicle that represented so much of what he had achieved. Henry was driving through the streets of New York. His face was streaked with blood. He felt ashamed and very angry. This anger was pounding in his head like a strong pain. Anger and the desire for revenge were mixed in his head in a way he had never felt before. He was a respected judge. He was a man who always had control over everything in his life. But he was confronted and beaten by Logan, who he thought was inferior to him. The image of Logan, strong and determined, with his head held high, it seemed that he was not afraid of anything or anyone. It overwhelmed him. Henry couldn't bear the thought of being embarrassed by that man in a neighborhood where he was well known and respected. Henry was disoriented, and his vision was blurred because he was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. He came to an intersection. He didn't see the oncoming car until it was too late. With the impact, he felt his body being thrown forward. The pain hit his every muscle. The other driver got out of the car very frightened, but Henry hardly noticed him. All he could see in his head was Logan, and that challenging look in his eyes. He was panting. His chest was rising and falling as if it was going to explode. And so the police arrived on the scene. They were responding to a request about a car accident. Henry, still confused, tried to organize himself. When he saw the officers, he thought of a bad plan. He knew a lot about the justice system. He leaned against the car and pretended to be more hurt than he really was. Then he started saying that it was all Logan's fault. "It was him," Henry said to the policeman, with a look of fear and pain that seemed well planned. "Logan, that man, he assaulted me. I was just walking through the neighborhood. Then he came up to me and threatened me. Then he started hitting me. I tried to escape, but he wanted to kill me." Henry's voice was shaking. Every word had a lie in it, which he said as if he knew very well how to deceive people. He understood how to act and how to tell the story he wanted. He was Judge Henry. No one would have the courage to doubt the story he was telling. When the policemen heard the accusation, they looked at each other with understanding. The story Henry was telling seemed big enough to make them feel very angry and want justice, or rather revenge, for their friend. Henry, with a weary manner and the appearance of someone who has suffered, made the officers believe that Logan was a dangerous man, like a predator posing as a businessman. Every detail he added helped to show Logan as a person who was dangerous to law and order. Within minutes, the police went to Logan's house. When they arrived, they didn't knock on the door as they usually do. They opened the gate with force. They entered confidently and determined not to give Logan any chance to explain himself. Logan, still stunned by what had happened last night, had no time to do anything when the police pulled him out of the house. The situation was violent. They threw him to the ground, shouting commands, and before he could understand what was happening, he felt the force of the blows. The police beat him right there, as if he were a big criminal. Logan, bruised and ashamed, tried to cope with the pain and anger that overwhelmed him inside. He asked the same question over and over again about why he was in jail, but no one answered. The people next door looked on from afar. Some looked at him with disdain. Others seemed annoyed. But none of them went near to help or ask what was going on. The photo of the black man, who was a businessman, being pulled over and treated violently by police officers in a wealthy neighborhood seemed, to many people, to be proof of what Henry had said. At the time, people didn't see Logan as a successful businessman who was respected. They saw him as someone who deserved to be controlled. At the police station, Henry arrived soon after. He had a happy expression, as if his plan was finally working. While Logan was locked up in a cold, dirty cell, Henry told his side of the story to the police officers and lawyers who were there. He explained how he had been attacked and humiliated by Logan, without letting Logan tell them what had happened. Henry was the only person who had the information. He knew that being a judge made people trust him. That night, after waiting for many hours, Logan received the news that he would be held until the trial. He was being accused of hitting someone. The injustice of the situation hit him almost as hard as the punches he had taken before. He tried to understand how all this had become a power struggle and a question of prejudice. Henry had managed to turn his life into a nightmare. He manipulated everything around him to get himself locked up and put to shame. While in prison, Logan decided he wasn't going to give up. Henry could try to finish him off, but he knew he had the truth on his side. What's more, he had a strong will to fight for justice. Prison, which was supposed to defeat him, only made him believe more. He knew that when he got out of that place, Henry would face the consequences of his actions. Henry's anger, which was too strong and uncontrolled, made the envy he felt become a problem that had no way back. At that moment, in a cold cell, Logan was preparing to fight. He wasn't just fighting for freedom, but also to get back everything that Henry had tried to take away from him. That included his dignity, his respect, and his place in the world. As he went to the hospital to tend to his injuries, Henry was already thinking about what he would do next. He knew he needed to use what had happened as a way of attacking Logan. He needed to go back to court with an account that showed him as the victim. That way, he would be able to show his power again. Henry understood the system better than anyone. He knew who the important people were. He knew friends with power, and he also knew the ways he could change the situation. When he came out of the hospital, his face full of bandages, and holding his body in a way that looked like someone who had suffered an injustice, Henry called the city's reporters and police officers. In a quick, planned interview, he talked about Logan. He said that Logan was a threat to people's safety and claimed that the businessman was an aggressive, uncontrolled, and dangerous man. He chose each word carefully. He wanted to feed the prejudice he knew existed. He disguised this with a false concern for the safety of the community. Henry skillfully played the victim. He told a story in which he, who is a judge and is supposed to protect the law, was violently assaulted by Logan. He fiddled with the details. He told how Logan had come up to him for no reason, hit him, and then threatened him very harshly. In Henry's story, he didn't say that it was he who had burned Logan's car in a rage. He hid the facts and changed them until they were the way he wanted them to be. The result appeared on the spot. Henry, with his power and relationships with journalists, managed to make many people see Logan as evil. The local media, influenced by Henry's misleading story, showed Logan as a businessman who, because of his wealth and conceit, thought he could break the rules. Henry said that this version would be the one that stayed. Anyone who tried to support Logan couldn't make themselves heard. The story was put together very carefully. In the days that followed, Henry met with his connections at the courthouse. They were judges and lawyers who needed to help him. In exchange for a good deal of money, they were ready to maintain the lie he had made. He knew that in order to punish Logan, he needed friends who would agree to ignore the truth. Henry secretly gave money to the judges. He paid each of them to make sure that whichever court was going to try the case already had a decision ready. To this end, Henry widened the net of deception he had already cast. With his position, he called judges and court lawyers to secret meetings. He had known these people for years. Often, these relationships were made in exchange for help and influence. He knew who to talk to. He thought of colleagues who had already participated in fraud with him. These colleagues either owed him favors or could accept his generous offer. Henry had no qualms about offering a lot of money as a bribe. He wanted everyone to stick by him and follow his plan exactly the way he wanted. The meetings took place discreetly. They always took place far away or in private homes. Henry took care of every detail very carefully. He took a good look at the weaknesses and interests of the people who were at his side. He knew that, if he paid a large sum, he could make any of them become his tools for controlling others. His idea was simple and easy to understand. It was to ensure that, at any new hearing or sentencing review, the decision against Logan would remain the same, and if it did, increase the sentence. Henry wanted people to remember Logan as a dangerous criminal. He thought that Logan's exaggerated ambition made him do violent acts and disrespect the law. He taught his friends to tell a negative story about Logan. They said that he had achieved success in a dubious way, and that his wealth was always a source of suspicion. Henry spread this idea in a disguised way. He let other people tell the story until it became a truth that everyone believed. In the halls of the courthouse, Logan's image was strange and dirty. People now saw him as an unscrupulous and very aggressive businessman. He was considered a threat to order and justice. Henry, in his confused mind, tried to understand the reason for his actions. For him, what he was doing wasn't just a way of getting even. It was a defense of order and good manners. He thought for sure that he was removing a threat from his world. Henry had great contempt for the idea that Logan, a free black man, could have the same status and respect as him. In his private conversations with allies, he stressed the responsibility of protecting society from men like Logan. He suggested that the businessman was a hidden threat. To make sure his plan would work, Henry took a collection of papers and evidence that would leave Logan in an even worse situation. Among these documents were false records of supposed cases of violence, which, according to the altered records, involved Logan. Henry used every tool he had. He changed the facts and planted evidence that, when shown in court, would confirm the erroneous image he had made. Meanwhile, Logan was in jail. He was living in a difficult and sad reality. This experience took away his dignity. He saw his empire fall little by little. He felt powerless to stop the downfall that Henry was causing. On the other hand, every day in prison, every minute away from people and going through difficult situations, he felt a desire to fight grow inside him, and an anger that he kept to himself. He spent a long time thinking. He remembered every part of how Henry had hurt him. Henry used the system to shame him and make him look like a criminal. Logan was very good at making plans. In the solitude of prison, he began to strategize. He realized that, in order to beat Henry, he would have to be as clever, as calm and as skilled as his opponent. He began to plan a response, knowing that on the outside he still had friends and things that Henry didn't know. Every idea Henry had, and every new piece of evidence that came to light only made Logan more determined. He was sure that being innocent wouldn't be enough. He needed to show who Henry was. He needed to show the world that Henry was a malicious, angry man. Henry's way of doing things, which was very big and complicated, was also his biggest mistake. In his desire to finish Logan off, he didn't see the businessman's strength. He didn't realize how strong someone can become when they have nothing left to lose. Henry thought his plan would be safe. He thought he was protected because of his connections and influence. He didn't think that every step planned to bring Logan down was actually making the anger and desire for justice of the man he wanted to end stronger. Logan was thinking of a plan. This plan, unlike Henry's, was free of lies and corruption. It was based on the truth. He would use his own system against the judge. He would show the web of deceit that Henry had created. And above all, he would recover his name and his honor. The day of the final trial arrived. As in a well-organized play, every part of Henry's plan was carefully laid out. It was all to ensure the outcome he had planned. Logan arrived at the courthouse with a firm stance and a determined look on his face. He knew that the people there were against him. Henry, on the other hand, went to court as an important person and almost as a hero. With a controlled expression, wearing perfect clothes, and with his face still showing bruises, he showed a combination of seriousness and well-rehearsed acceptance. To the people watching, he looked like a judge who cared about justice. He looked like a defender of order, but unfortunately, he had suffered an assault from an arrogant and violent businessman. Henry understood that his image was strong, and he used this to control people's feelings. He walked around with a sad face. This made his victim's story stronger with every step he took. By the time the trial started, Henry was sure that the details that showed Logan guilty would be clear enough for everyone to see him as the villain. The judges and lawyers he had paid were ready. Every one of them was ready to convict Logan without a second thought. Henry knew that every person who testified and every piece of evidence had been well crafted to support what he was saying, so there was no chance of anyone asking questions about it. He spent a lot of money to keep his secret, but for Henry, it was a worthwhile expense. The evidence that had been created began to show. First, there were fake documents about cases of violence in which Logan had supposedly participated before. These documents were carefully crafted by Henry and his friends. Altered photos, changed lines, and even false witness accounts helped to form a false image of Logan. One by one, the documents appeared. Each document showed him to be a man who acted without thinking, was aggressive, and could be dangerous. Henry looked up from his seat, happy, as the story he had made happened exactly as he had thought. When it was Henry's turn to speak, he gave a great presentation of his pain and anger. In a low, calm voice, he told the story he himself had created. He told how Logan had approached him aggressively, threatened him, and then struck him. Henry spoke about the assault with a lot of false emotion. He told in detail about the fear he felt and how weak he felt. He said that as a judge, he never thought he would experience something so humiliating. Henry, in his confused mind, thought he was playing the best role of his life. He believed that every word was a way of making everyone believe that he was the real victim. When Logan had the chance to speak, he stood up with a strong, confident expression. He tried to talk about what had happened. He wanted to tell his side of the story. He explained that Henry had started the fight. He said that the judge had pursued him for months. He also said that the judge had manipulated the police and used their work to try to bring him down. He told his truth truthfully, but the reactions of the judges and jury showed no sympathy or understanding. They only showed a coldness that he already knew. It was as if everything he said had no effect. It was a small truth getting lost in a sea of lies that people already accepted. Henry's eyes looked nowhere else. He saw on the judge's face a glow of happiness and a certainty that he had won. Logan realized at that moment that the court wasn't there to judge him fairly. He had already been punished from the moment Henry decided to take revenge on him. Logan's lawyer tried to help. He wanted to show proof that Henry's story was wrong. But every time he tried, someone quickly stopped him. The judge who had the case in his hands, who was a friend of Henry's, tried to ignore any argument. He rejected evidence and testimony that didn't fit with the story Henry had created. It was a very cruel show of manipulation. Every single thing that happened seemed designed to embarrass Logan. He was deprived of speaking and of his dignity. The final sentence came unsurprisingly. The penalty is 10 years in prison. In addition, the person must pay a fine of $230,000 to Henry. This amount is compensation for the physical, emotional, and material damage he suffered as a result of the assault. When Logan heard the sentence, he felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on him. It seemed that all the work, all the fighting, and all the travel he had done to get to where he was had been for nothing. He looked at Henry, who looked pleased, and realized that, for the judge, this trial was more than just putting someone away. It was a punishment, a lesson he wanted to teach Logan for having the courage to stand up and challenge the system. As they led him out of the courtroom, Logan looked around. He saw the faces of curious people, journalists, and a few acquaintances. These people looked at him with a mixture of disapproval and pity. He felt the loneliness of that moment. They had pushed him away because of Henry's malice. But at the same time, something inside him didn't want to let him down. He saw that, even though Henry had won the fight that day, the war was far from over. Logan knew that the system was corrupt, that Henry used his position to manipulate and destroy anyone who opposed him. But inside Logan, an idea to fight was beginning to grow. He would accept the decision for now, but he didn't feel defeated. As he returned to prison, he vowed that he would find a way to change this injustice. He wanted to show who Henry really was and take back what he had lost. Prison may take away your freedom for a while, but it doesn't take away your will to fight. Henry managed to make the courtroom a place full of lies. But now, Logan had a new goal. He wanted to recover his truth and put an end to the lies and corruption that his adversary had created. The first few days in prison were very hard on his mind. While he tried to understand the injustice that had trapped him, he couldn't stop thinking about the memories of the trial. Every night, lying on the uncomfortable bed in his cell, he remembered everything that had been said. He thought of every contemptuous look and every gesture from Henry. Henry, who was in his place as victim, watched Logan fall with a happiness he didn't try to hide. The shame in front of the others, and the very harsh punishment, were a reminder that Henry had mastered the situation, using the rules to his advantage. On the outside, Logan's life was breaking down. He, who had built up a large business in the technology sector with 5 successful companies, was now seeing his name sullied. The newspapers, following the story told by Henry, showed Logan as a dishonest and aggressive businessman. He was portrayed as someone who used his power and influence to threaten and attack a well-regarded judge. Articles with eye-catching headlines were on the rise. Former business friends began to distance themselves. Some withdrew their money, others undid deals. Logan's empire was destroyed. His fame was ruined by false accusations and lies that Henry carefully spread. Life in prison was difficult. Logan tried to maintain his dignity. However, living with other prisoners and the rough manner of the guards tested him all the time. He had a bad reputation. People didn't trust him. Many people thought he was arrogant and powerful. He was a businessman who, in the opinion of some, deserved to be in that place. He tried to stand his ground, but it was hard not to notice the looks of discontent and the comments around him. Over time, Logan noticed that prison was changing something inside him. What Henry thought was making him weak was actually making him stronger in a way he hadn't expected. Logan learned to take pain and hatred and use it as a calming force. He let this force make his will stronger every day. In the solitude of prison, he began to think carefully about how to take revenge. He knew that just being free wasn't what he wanted. He wanted justice. To achieve this, he would need patience and care. He used his free moments to remember everything that had happened to put him in that situation. He began to remember every mistake in the story that Henry had made. He thought of every person who could speak out against the judge. He also thought of every piece of evidence that could show the corruption that was ruining the court. Logan knew that outside of that place he had friends. These people knew his story and could support him. And with that idea, the desire to change the situation became a clear goal. It's been 6 months now. For Henry, those 6 months showed that Logan had left public life for good. This was proof that the system was helping Henry. He was still a respected judge. He went about his work believing that everything was under control. But what he didn't know was that, while he was living his life, Logan was quietly planning everything. He was creating a plan that would be his only opportunity to make amends. After months of working with the courts, Logan's lawyer won a small breakthrough. He got the chance to leave prison temporarily, as long as he paid a very high bail of $1 million. Logan understood that this amount wasn't just a collection of money. It was also another way for Henry to try to make him weaker financially. Still, he had no doubts. With the help of his few friends who were still with him, he managed to raise the money and finally felt what it was like to be free. But this freedom didn't bring peace of mind. Logan was now a man with marks. His name was still spoken of in a bad light. His image was ruined. He was free and determined. That was all he needed to continue with his plan. He knew that Henry didn't expect him to come back. The judge thought Logan was beaten, powerless, and alone. But Henry had made a mistake. He didn't see the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Freedom, even for a short time, was what helped him take his revenge. Logan, with what little dignity he still had, was willing to do whatever it took to right the wrong Henry had done to him. Now it was no longer a question of clearing his name, but of putting an end to the pack of lies Henry had created. He wanted to show who the judge was, a man who was soiled by envy and power. He was someone who had used justice to end the life of an innocent person. Logan was now a person who had survived a very hard fall. He became a man marked by pain, but also driven by the desire to take revenge for every punch and every humiliation he had suffered. Logan began to work in silence. He knew that in order to get revenge, he had to be careful like Henry. He couldn't trust everyone. He knew he needed to gather people who could help. These people had to be loyal and dislike the corruption that exists in the system, just like him. His plan began with detailed research. Logan knew that in order to beat Henry, he needed to show the bribery and corruption that had influenced the trial against him. He spent a lot of money to put together a group of private detectives and investigative specialists. These professionals are good at finding suspicious bank transfers and showing connections that seemed invisible at first. It was painstaking work. He needed time and patience. But Logan didn't want to miss any details. With the resources he still had, Logan discreetly paid for investigations into Henry's life and the people he knew. He wanted to know everything. Notes about the money, strange movements in the bank, hidden meetings, and messages exchanged at strange times. As time went by, his team began to find evidence that Henry didn't think he could trace. Large money transfers that Henry made to other judges and court workers were in the secret documents. Conversations that were overheard, and witnesses who didn't want to talk, showed the corruption plan that Henry guarded very carefully. Logan knew that with every piece of evidence he presented, he was getting closer to showing what the judge was really like. At the same time, Logan began to carefully enter groups that Henry didn't think he could access. With the support of powerful friends, he started going to business events and parties of wealthy people. These were places where Henry never thought he would see him again. His presence was a quiet but strong reminder that he hadn't been totally destroyed, as the judge wanted. The gossip began to spread. Logan came back and didn't seem to want to be quiet. Henry began to notice these signs with a feeling of surprise and annoyance. For him, Logan should be finished, a man destroyed by prison and public shame. But the businessman was now disputing the story, turning up in places where Henry never thought he'd see him. The pressure was mounting every day. Henry began to notice that there was something strange around him. He felt that something was out of his control. The judge tried not to pay attention, but the appearance of Logan, who had returned unexpectedly and silently, had him agitated. Meanwhile, Logan's team was hard at work. They put together a strong dossier that had every piece of evidence Henry had tried to hide. They gathered reports from court workers who, even in fear, began to tell of the pressure they received to help Henry. Other judges, who accepted bribes without saying anything, were recognized as helpers. Each piece of information and testimony formed a clearer picture of the corruption that Henry used to cheat the system against Logan. After a few months, Logan was ready for the next step. With the dossier ready, he called one of the major television stations and arranged an exclusive interview that would show new things. He wanted people to know the truth. He wanted them to see how deep the corruption in the system ran. On the day of the interview, he arrived with the dossier. He brought a pile of documents and evidence. He was going to show everything on the spot. Logan told them everything that had happened during his persecution. He explained how the trial had been manipulated and talked about the threats he had received indirectly. He showed the names, the money movements, and the clear evidence that showed Henry to be a very corrupt man. The interview was very successful in the media. Henry, now involved in a major public problem, saw his image as a respectable person fall within hours. The file on Logan was being shown in the newspapers, and the public's demands on Henry grew by the day. With each new piece of information, the judge's friends began to distance themselves. They wanted to avoid any connection with the problem. Henry tried to remain calm, but the shame and fear of losing everything he had done was clear in every interview and appearance he made. The investigation soon began. Henry, who had previously run the system as he pleased, was now under his thumb. Logan watched everything closely. He did so quietly and without rushing anything. Finally, the day of the final fight arrived. Logan, together with his lawyers and friends, entered the courtroom certain that justice was on his side. He showed the complete dossier. In it, he clearly explained how Henry had used his position to mess with the system. With each piece of evidence presented and each piece of testimony shown, new information emerged that stripped away the judge's respectable image. Henry, who was trying to control himself, felt trapped. His expression changed as the evidence piled up against him. His once confident eyes now showed a mixture of fear and anger. He tried to stop, to say that it was all a setup. But every word he said was covered by the vast amount of evidence that could not be denied. He saw people he never imagined would be there. Men and women told him about the threats and bribes Henry had made. Each one spoke, one after the other, without a second thought. With each new witness, the judge seemed to grow sadder, realizing that his world of lies and corruption was coming to an end. After the trial, Henry was no longer the same man. His power and control were gone, and he was in the hands of the justice he had always manipulated. The news came quickly. Henry lost his job, could no longer act in any public capacity, and was sentenced to 6 months house arrest. He found this punishment shameful, but it was the result of what he had done to Logan. Logan, for his part, watched everything with a calm but happy face. He had regained his dignity. He had told the truth, and most importantly, he had defeated the man who had tried to finish him off. He knew the journey had been long and difficult, but now he finally felt at ease. He had won back not only his freedom, but also his honor and the respect of several people who, until that moment, had believed Henry's lies. Henry, now without power, without friends, and without the good image he had, left the courthouse while people looked at him with contempt. Those who had once applauded him no longer respected him. The news of Henry's departure appeared on the front pages of newspapers as a major scandal. For Henry, being sentenced to stay at home was the worst moment of his shame. He no longer had the power to frighten or control the people around him. He was confined to his own home, where he was always watched and dominated. He felt like he was imprisoned, even without bars. It was a punishment that not only took away his freedom to move, but also made him lose what he valued most, the respect and power that, until then, he thought would never end. Henry, once a frightening man, was now trapped in his own home. He wore a device on his ankle that reminded him, at every moment, of what he had lost. The days in the prison house were very difficult. The mansion that once represented power and protection now became a place of shame and loneliness. When Henry was alone, he felt his own thoughts following him. He remembered the events that had taken place. He thought of the times when he decided to give money to colleagues, threaten people who could testify, and cheat the system to benefit himself. He thought that the past was necessary somehow, but now that past was coming back to torment him. Every act of corruption and every injustice he did now seemed to show his own downfall. His family was also struggling. His wife and daughters, who had previously lived a good life because of Henry's work, were now affected by the scandal. They hardly left the house. They were afraid of the stares and comments from their neighbors. Henry saw the distance growing between him and his wife. She accused him of destroying the family. In every conversation, in every wordless moment at mealtimes, he could see the guilt. He tried not to think about it, but the guilt always returned. Henry was a man alone. He was surrounded by walls that seemed to get tighter every day. The few friends and allies who were still with him in court soon drifted away. They did this to try to protect their own reputations. Henry, with each passing day, was becoming an outcast in the world of law. He was a reminder that even the strongest people can lose everything. No friend would go to see him. No lawyer would speak for him in public. He was alone and abandoned. The society he once led now saw him as someone to be forgotten. While Henry was going through a very difficult time, Logan watched from afar. He was calm, but inside he felt joy that his plan was working. He had kept his promise. Henry was finally facing the consequences of every lie, every manipulation, and every act of prejudice he had tried to use against him. Logan, on the other hand, didn't feel meaningless happiness. For him, justice was more than just taking revenge. To see Henry fall was to regain his own honor. It meant taking back everything that had been so cruelly taken from him. Logan went on to do more. He knew that Henry, even without power, still had some things and a name that, although dirty, could still be remembered in some groups. So, to show that justice was complete, Logan took action to have the judge's property stopped and sold. The money would be used to pay the compensation he himself had to pay before. He wanted Henry to feel how hard it was to lose what he valued so much: his comfort, his security with money, and his idea of being better than others. As time went by, Henry began to notice that his house, which had once shown its importance, was becoming a burden. For Logan, winning justice in court and seeing Henry rejected in public brought a sense of happiness and closure. But he still felt that something was missing. The fire in the Lamborghini Huracan, which represented everything he had done, was still in the back of his mind. Henry had burned not only a car that had value, but also a part of Logan's history, his journey, and everything it meant. Logan still had one final bill to settle. It was an adjustment that would help Henry realize, clearly and symbolically, the impact of his actions. Calmly and carefully, Logan planned his last action. He didn't want to commit a crime or do something that would ruin his good image. However, he had friends who were ready to act more firmly and directly. Without anyone noticing, he hired a group of discreet and experienced men. These men understood what they had to do and were going to act carefully. The plan was to take revenge on Henry, making him feel the same impact he felt when he saw his car on fire. During the night, the men arrived at Henry's house, which was now old and in a bad state. Henry, who was stuck there after losing his job, no longer had any signs of power and control. The finances were very bad. Expensive furniture and objects were disappearing. They were being sold to pay bills or just to live. When the men knocked on the door, Henry opened it without knowing what was going to happen. They told him, with a very cold calm, that he and his family needed to leave the house immediately. Henry, a little sleepy and scared, tried to talk, but he saw that the men were serious. They didn't seem to want to negotiate. He realized at that moment that there was something more important going on. He quickly called his wife and daughters. Everyone left quickly, pushed by the tension and haste of the visitors. Outside, Henry and his family stared helplessly at what would happen next. The men undoubtedly went inside the house. Within minutes, the smell of gasoline began to waft through the air. Henry felt his heart beating fast. He remembered what he had done to Logan's Lamborghini. Now he could see the situation changing. He was feeling the pain of losing something that, even in its bad state, still showed what was left of his life. The fire began to burn, and the flames began to destroy the building. First, it was slow, then faster and stronger, as if they were being fed by the destruction Henry had caused. The burning house glowed in the night, and Henry looked on helplessly as everything he owned that was good and comfortable went up in smoke and ashes. His wife and daughters were crying. They were very sad and scared. He tried to hide how he felt, but he was actually feeling very weak and vulnerable. Henry was experiencing something he had never thought he would. He was losing all control. He felt like he was just a powerless observer as his life fell apart. He had no way of stopping. He couldn't ask for help. The only thing left was to watch. Destroying the house wasn't just about revenge. It was also a warning to Henry. He could no longer frighten or control others. It was a sign of his own destruction. It was a reaction to the fire that he had lit in a crazy and evil way, as a demonstration of his hatred for Logan. The flames showed his own end, a sad image of the life he now saw. No power, no respect, and no control. When the fire stopped, Henry was very sad. He was no longer the judge. The powerful, frightening man who controlled everything and everyone around him had changed. He was just a man who had nowhere to live. He had no respect, and none of the fame that once protected him. That night, with his family by his side, he truly realized how much weight his actions carried. He saw the ultimate consequence of his prejudice and arrogance. As Henry looked at the hot ashes of what had been his home, Logan, from afar, sensed that the end he so desperately wanted had come. He wouldn't have to make an effort by getting his hands dirty, but the cycle of injustice and pride that Henry had started was over. The destruction of the house was the last message. It was a warning that Henry could never cross certain boundaries without facing the consequences. For Logan, that night didn't just mean the end of a fight. It was also the beginning of a new era in which he could feel free of any problems. Now Henry was truly alone. He no longer had the power of his job. He didn't have the comfort of home. Nor did he have the friends who had once been with him. He, who once thought that nothing could happen to him, now understood that the world he had made through lies and manipulation could end irreversibly. Henry was very stressed. Without his position, without his influence, and without his own home, he became a man who suffered a lot and was despised. After the fire, Henry found it very difficult to sleep. The face that appeared in the mirror was that of a man who looked older because of fear and despair. He had lost everything that made him feel important. Now, without a place to hide from shame in front of others, he lived like a bandit in his own town. He was afraid every day of the next attack Logan might make. With his house damaged and no money, Henry had to look for a place to stay in a simple hotel. This was a place he would never have chosen at other times. His wife and daughters, who once lived very comfortably, were now sharing a small room with him. They felt sad and afraid. Every noise and movement outside made them jump. It felt like they were always in danger. Henry no longer felt pride. There was only panic and doubt. He began to realize that being there was doing his family more harm than any help. Faced with this very difficult situation, Henry decided to run away. The idea was to run far away, to get rid of Logan and the past he himself had made. He understood that Logan could reach him anywhere. The only option left was to travel out of the country, to a place where he could perhaps make a fresh start and get away from the consequences of his actions. London was a place where he had some relatives who lived far away. He believed that the scandal was not yet there. So London seemed to be his last safe place. On a hot and nervous night, Henry, his wife, and their 2 daughters left the hotel discreetly. They carried small suitcases and had sad expressions. He had told them about the plan only a short time before. What was left of his family had no choice, and accepted. Henry bought last-minute tickets to London. He used up almost all the savings he had left. The journey was full of sadness and despair. His relatives' faces showed the doubt and pain of leaving the country and the life they knew. When they finally got on the boat, Henry tried to believe that he was making the right decision. He thought that London would be the start of a new life for him. The shame she felt was a weight he couldn't escape. He understood that he was a man on the run. He knew he would never be able to look at his past without thinking of Logan. He would always remember the house on fire and the looks of disdain from the people who once admired him. On the plane, his wife was quiet, his daughters were sad, and Henry felt the pain of having left bad things behind. He knew it had been caused by him. He remembered, in his head, every choice, every control, every moment when he had used power to offend and frighten. Now, he was the person who felt ashamed, the one who was afraid, the man who was trying to escape his past. When they arrived in London, Henry no longer felt as safe as before. Everything seemed cold and strange. He understood that, even in that place, he would never be able to escape the memories of his previous life and the attitudes that had brought him there. London, which he had once known for rich trips and important moments, now seemed like a sad place. It was a place where he felt alone and worthless. Life in the new city was easy, with almost no resources compared to what he had known before. The relatives who welcomed him tried to help, but Henry soon saw that, even though he was there was nothing else that could bring back the pride and respect he used to have. He tried to find easy jobs, but his fame followed him. As a result, he could hardly stay in any job. The person who had once been a strong judge was now doing jobs that didn't even require half the fame and experience he was so proud of. When Logan found out that Henry had escaped, He felt a mixture of happiness and determination. He would no longer have to chase the judge. He would also no longer have to make plans or take action to put an end to him. Henry took care of his own exile and his own punishment. Logan knew that this was the worst punishment the judge could have. He would have to live as an outsider, without status, without respect, and without the dignity he had once taken from others. Logan understood that for Henry, being in that state of sadness and unable to do anything would be harder than any prison sentence. Henry, who was now lost in a different city, was beginning to think about his own mistakes. He could no longer forget what he had done, the cost to his family of his choices, the pain he had caused Logan, and all the people who had passed through his life. On one of these walks, Henry found an old, quiet church. It was a place he had never been to before, but which now seemed to give him a strange sense of welcome. While he was there, Henry felt great regret. He realized that he would never have Logan's forgiveness. He knew that he could never put right what he had done wrong. In the days that followed, Henry went to church several times. He tried to find a way to feel better about the regret that made him suffer. He understood that nothing could bring back the respect of his family or society. Besides, Logan was away and remaking his life, without the negative influence he had tried to put on him. Henry began to realize that for him, there was no such thing as a fresh start. In everyday life, Logan found calm in simple things. He liked to read a book quietly at the weekend. He also enjoyed meeting up with friends who always supported him and never doubted who he was. Logan had moments to think about everything he had experienced and felt proud that he had stayed true to himself. Every night Henry remembered Logan, and it made him sad. He remembered the fights, the arrogant way he treated him, the attempts to break up with a man who did nothing but not submit to him. Now, Henry understood that his prejudice had not only destroyed him, but had also taken away his opportunity for peace and respect. He had run after Logan with a force that now seemed insane. He couldn't imagine it. In the end, he saw that his own obsession and prejudice were what had really ruined his social and emotional life. Logan, on the other hand, had a full life. He had remade his career, his name, and his history. He was admired and respected. His success showed that true character could not be destroyed by anyone. So Henry spent his last days feeling sorry for himself. Meanwhile, Logan got on with his life in peace. He showed everyone that true strength lay not in hurting people, but in facing challenges with respect and honesty.